Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Franchise Show. I'm all doing well. And this is the show where we get under the hat of all things franchising. And it's a live show. It's live if it's 5:15 on the 5th of May. Day after Star Wars Day, of course. And because it's live, we love you to get involved. So if you're here, please pop in a comment, say hello, and get involved in our conversations. I say it every week, but you are the producers and the directors of this show. So please take the conversation the way you want it to go. Now, what do we do each week on the Franchise Show? We take a new topic and a lovely guest, and there's no exception to that this week. We have a fantastic guest with us. Before we introduce him to you, let's talk about what the subject is today. And today the subject is selling a business as a franchisee. So it's going to be a really interesting one to get into, really important as well, because when we set out as franchisees, we're going to have an exit plan, and it needs to be talked about a bit more, in my view. So before we get into it, let's introduce the lovely Andrew Marcoux of Businesses for Sale. Andrew, welcome back to the Franchise Show.
Hello, Harvey. Good to see you. Good to be back again.
Yes, and it's fantastic.
Do I earn some sort of badge now? This may be my third or even fourth time.
Yeah, what I might do is I might get some pin badge made with some hats, and
100%.
each appearance you get another one.
And at one point, I hope it becomes a hat itself.
Yeah.
But I do feel a bit of a veteran for your show, and I'm very happy to be here again. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome, and it's fantastic, of course, to have you with us. So let's do a little introduction. Of course, lots of people know you, Andrew, but do a little introduction to yourself and to Businesses for Sale again, just so that new people who are watching this time have got an understanding of where you've come from and what the business is.
Right. Yes. So it's very much, I don't think you can imagine a domain name that more accurately and succinctly portrays what we are. Businessesforsale.com is exactly what it says on the tin. We are what I guess Rightmove is for houses and lettings. We are for businesses and franchises. In a nutshell, we're a marketplace, online marketplace. We connect buyers and sellers of businesses, and we've been doing that, me and my brother, co-founder Marcus, for the best part of 30 years, one guise or another, and it has been one guise or another through the different eons. But yeah, as an established kind of .com web marketplace, I'd say we've been doing this in earnest since the early 2000s, from the heady days of the .com bubble. And yeah, we keep doing what we're doing. Franchises is a relatively newcomer, about 20 years old, in terms of us dealing with franchises as effectively a subsector of the wider business world. But obviously we're very well entrenched there and well represented as a route to market to help franchisors reach new franchisees. And I guess our USP is that we attract not necessarily direct buyers of franchises, but it's a bit more tangential, because they're looking for wider opportunities in terms of entrepreneurs getting into business ownership through acquiring a business, and realize that actually that business could be a franchise, either as a new territory or indeed as a resale, which neatly joins us onto obviously today's topic.
Very good. Great segue there, Andrew. Love it. Fantastic. Well, look, thank you for that lovely introduction. And we're going to welcome a few people who have already joined us here live before we get into today's topic. First of all, let's say hello to the lovely Penny Hopkinson. Penny has been a long-standing supporter of the show. It's always fantastic to have you with us, Penny. Penny is the author of a lovely book, which I always show. Have I got it the right way? I have got it the right way around, Penny. Look at that. A beautiful thing. So please check out Penny's book if you want to get your ops manuals the right way round. I'm very proud of my advert I do there. And of course, that QR code is on the screen now. Penny has put hello, Harvey, Andrew, and all franchise friends. Fantastic to have you with us, Penny. We have got Michael Bushby with us. Michael, welcome to the Franchise Show. Great to have you with us. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on franchise sales from a franchisee perspective. And it's fantastic to have you with us, of course. We also have Shams Ali with us as well. Shams, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us here today. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on franchisee selling of a franchise. I really didn't say that in the right way, but there you go. So let's get into this. So I suppose let's look at this we can look at it at various different angles, but let's look at it from the point of view, first of all, you're a franchisee, you've invested into a franchise business, and you're looking now to sell. Well, do you think that process, where should that start? I feel it should start very early on.
Well, I think even before you buy the franchise in the first place, you've got to know how you're going to get out. There's that old cliche, isn't it? I never go into a room without knowing how I'm going to get out of it. And I think that's obviously true if you're a franchisee, and you should be if you're a franchisee. So if you are a seller, you really got to know your franchise agreement inside out, because to me, this kind of dictates the terms of what you're selling in the first instance. I mean, selling a business, and you are selling a business when you're selling a franchise as a franchisee, is hard enough. But actually selling it with understanding the restrictions and constraints that are all bound up in the legal terms of the franchise agreement is another level altogether. So I really would advise you get very clued in with that, and you should be, of course, clued in with that, given you've signed and wetted ink on that page whenever it was that you purchased and procured that franchise. So and it's important to understand how that impacts liquidity, the marketability, the hurdles you may need to clear as the selling franchisee. So yeah, I mean, like I say, selling a standard independent business is tough enough, but you're selling that and also whatever's inside that franchise agreement, the transfer rights, the assignment rights, getting the franchisor's consent is absolutely critical. They may have right of first refusal. Are you selling the existing agreement, or is there going to be a new agreement? Again, the nuance of all this is all bound up in that franchise agreement. And if you are a franchisee and you are one who has the conscience, a good conscience, and someone who's dutiful and has observed all the rights and wrongs of running the business, then you should know that inside out and know what the implications are when it comes to the time to sell. At some level, all business ownership, including being a franchisee, you're a custodian. It's a temporary, you're a tenant. You think you're a landlord, but really you're a tenant. And at some point, you're going to be handing that on. So my first advice would be absolutely know what you're selling from an agreement point of view. But then there's the discipline and the wherewithal that you have to adhere to when selling a business too, in terms of making sure you have got all your ducks in a row in regard to the actual business. Like, what is it that you're actually selling as a business? Do you understand the depth and breadth? Is everything in place in terms of the contractual side? Do you have the last 3 years accounts? Do you have management accounts? How's your VAT filings? What's your list of tangible and intangible assets? Do you know them? How are you going to value them? What's your earnings? You need to understand your earnings as a franchisee, because that's one of the most critical add backs that you have when it comes to actual valuation. The valuation. So there's a bit of a moving target here. So lots and lots of layers that you need to really unpick and have in play as almost a pre-diligence. You're almost foreseeing the due diligence that the buyer's going to have to undertake and you need a bit of a crystal ball. And beyond that, you need to codify and get this all down. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it's
I
a
love
very
that.
well worn path. And of course, the more you do that as a franchisee and understand that, the the more chance you're going to have a better sale, a cleaner sale, and one that will probably be at a better valuation. So
Mhm.
it'll all come back to you in terms of making sure you do your hygiene, and you get your knowledge right.
Mhm. I think it was really interesting. I love how you started there with that agreement and that you made that point of selling a business is hard enough anyway. You know, there are things that you have to do to make sure that sale goes well, that it's attractive, it's marketable, all of these things. But then you also have that other layer of the fact that, like you say, the franchise or might have first refusal. They certainly need to vet the person that you're going to sell to and approve them into the network. So, really interesting advice. And you know, some of the things you put there in that discipline of the sale itself, I think we could do episodes on anyway, and we're certainly going to touch on some of those in a moment. Before we do that, let's say hello to another few people who have joined us live. We've got the lovely Charles Call, excuse me. I said before to Andrew, I've got a bit of a cough, which is it's going to be fun for this. We've got Charles Caldwell from Hong Kong. Always lovely to have you with us, Charles. I know it's about 1 a.m. where you are, so it's always a real pleasure to have you with us. And thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. We've got Sadaf, of course, from Chicken Cottage. Always lovely to have you with us, Sadaf. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Chicken Cottage a fair few times and have met Sadaf quite a few times, so including at the awards, actually, very recently. Another brilliant topic, Harvey. Well, look, it'd be really interesting to see from your experience, Sadaf, what franchise sales have looked like in the business, you know, and what advice you would give to make that a smoother operation in the future. We've got Joe Caruso with us. Joe is going to give me my weekly test on pronouncing his address. Well, not his full address. Here we go. Hi, all from the gentle shores of Havre de Grace, Maryland, along the Susquehanna River at the Chesapeake Bay, at Franchise HQ LLC HQ. Oh no, said HQ twice there. I'm going to be marked down on that, where franchising solutions are achieved. And I want my I survived the franchise show with Harvey. I earned it. Oh, yes, maybe that's what I can put on the badge. We'll see. We'll see. Well, I'm looking forward to my score, Joe. But of course, I'm looking forward absolutely to hear your thoughts on selling franchises from a franchisee's perspective. Joe is based in the US. It's a very different landscape there. But of course, franchise sales happen just as they do here in the UK. And they happen on perhaps a greater scale. So it'd be really interesting to see Joe's thoughts on this, you know, and different types of buyers, private equity, all of these sorts of things as well. So fantastic to have you with us, Joe. Thanks for being here as always. So look, I think it would be great. You know, we've spoken here about this franchisee. You know, we can picture that in our minds, a franchisee who's looking to sell. And one of the things you said there is about accounts, assets, VAT, earnings, right? And knowing these figures. And I think in my experience, having talked to quite a lot of franchisees over the years, it's not too common for all franchisees to readily know this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that's got to be something that changes. Everyone's got to know their numbers, because you can't sell something when you don't know the numbers, can you?
Well, we've all seen Dragon's Den when, you know, the dragons inspect the financial wherewithal of the unsuspecting candidates, and they really can kind of unstuck, you know, the difference between net profit and gross profit, cost of sales, and all the various aspects, you know, aspects of an assets or liabilities of a balance sheet, etc. So I do think whether you're running a franchise or you're running a standard business, having kind of some basic bookkeeping knowledge and financial wherewithal is an absolute critical aspect of running a business. I don't see how you can run a business without knowing that. It's the long and the short of it. It's just that, I guess, that the lifeblood and the rule book by which every business runs by. And to the extent that obviously when you're filing your account, you're standardizing and normalizing those accounts alongside every single other business in the Western Hemisphere, right? Millions and millions of other businesses. So actually, it's not that much to kind of really get to know. We're not talking about getting your accounting exams sorted out there. It's just actually, from a management perspective, understanding your management accounts, whether that's an income statement, balance sheet, or cash flow statement. I think these are kind of really, really standard things. But I mean, going back beyond that, to my mind, the keyest thing I think a franchisee should be doing is understanding from a franchisor's perspective what they're wanting from the sale too, because a buyer is ultimately negotiating with two different parties when they're buying a prospective franchise resale, right? They're not only dealing with the franchisee, who may be at the kind of coalface of the relationship of the sale, but they're also dealing with that franchisor behind. So I've already touched upon how that is impacted with the franchise agreement and how that can then impact liquidity, marketability of the opportunity, that idea that you have an actual market value and an unrestricted market value. And the reality is you're going to have an actual market value. And the franchisor is absolutely the critical component in this, not least because of the right of first refusal, but they can refuse candidates out of hand. They're going to want to know who that new prospective franchisee is. And it's not just about the finances of it. It's also, as it would be with a new territory, about the suitability and the fit of the candidate for that franchise. There's a risk and an element of risk that needs to be de-risked by the franchisor when they're taking on a new franchisee as a result of a resale. So there's again that side of it, the psychometric fit side and the personality fit side, which a franchisor has to de-risk too. So in a way, you're selling, it's being sold twice, the business, and to the extent a buyer is buying the business twice with the franchisor behind. So my advice to a prospective buyer of a franchise resale is to actually go talk to the franchisor as early as possible. Get the buy-in there, as well as the franchisee who you may initially have the conversations with.
I think that's really interesting, because when you think about it, if you've grown a business for 20 years and you decide it's time to sell that business, to a degree, and I say this perhaps lightly here, but if you're selling it for pure financial reasons, it's time to move on from the business, you have no more involvement. Do you care who's going to buy it? I don't know. A lot of people will, because it's something that they've worked so hard, put so much of themselves into. But it really, when you're a franchisee doing this is a huge part of it. Like you say, the suitability and fit can't just be anybody who's got the ability to be able to pay the sum of money that's being requested to buy the business. It's a lot deeper than that.
Oh, 100%. I think, as a business owner myself, when I think about who I want to potentially buy the business, because I ain't going to live forever. And, like I say, we're all tenants in this life rather than even if we perceive ourselves to be landlords, life is at some level always going to be temporary. I do think it's important that the posterity of your legacy is handled with the best possible care. And you care. Why? Because you care for your clients and your customers. You care for your product, and you ultimately will care that that person that you're selling it on to will pay it the best possible respect that that you gave it in your working life and taking it forward. I think you owe that to everybody concerned, and not least, of course, your employees and the people you've worked with, because
Absolutely.
they're going to have a new boss. You ain't.
Mm.
So I do think there's a karmic energy to that.
Yeah, I think so, and I love that, and I think that because that's the attitude of yourself and the people within your team, and that's the advice that you're putting out. You know, you know that when I was working with a franchisor, that I used your business, and there was always a fantastic quality of people coming through your business, and I think it's because you're pushing through that attitude of caring, that attitude of getting the right people for a business. And you know, it clearly shows. Let's quickly, excuse me, this is apologies. Let's just quickly get to a few comments before we continue. Joe's put t-shirt. Ah, that's in. So he thinks it would be a good idea to me do some t-shirts saying I survived the franchise show with Harvey. I like that. It's a good idea, Joe.
I
Some
think
merch.
I've earned a full suit by now, top to tail.
Free piece. Yeah, absolutely. Let's have a look. Joe's given me a score. Sadly, while you made an earnest attempt, you were off the mark and your score was impacted accordingly. 7.5. Not bad. Not bad. I'll take that. I'll take that today. I said to Joe, I could Google and look up how to pronounce that and then learn it. But I kind of like the fun of just seeing what the score is and just changing it according to that. So there you go. We've got Mark Scott with us. Mark is going to be, and I will get back to you, Mark, who are on my to-do list. Mark's going to be a guest coming up on the show, so it'll be great to have Mark on, great expert in franchising. So looking forward to that. We're going to have a great discussion, I'm sure. He's put hi all, great start to the discussion. Well, thank you very much. So let's have a look. We've discussed now from the point of view of a franchisee selling their business. And we've touched on that franchisee understanding that perspective of a franchisor. Perhaps we can now look at a couple of things. Let's look at the perspective now. Let's go to that perspective of the franchisor when their franchisee is selling. And then let's perhaps take it down the road of when you're buying that business from a franchisee. So when your franchisee, now I'm sitting in the shoes or under the hat, probably I should say that, of a franchisor, and my franchisee is looking to sell. I think a lot of franchisors mistakenly collect together the sort of the concept of a franchisee exiting the business as possibly a negative thing, but it's not. It's not. It's part of the natural life cycle of a franchise business, and it's a success because you brought someone on board as a franchisee. They wanted to run the business, and ultimately they wanted to exit the business, hopefully with a profit. So by achieving that, it's a success. What's your sort of thoughts on the process, first of all?
Well, my thoughts are that there's something like 50,000 franchise units in the UK. So inevitably, there's going to be churn. Why? People get ill, for a start. Age is a real fact in all of this in terms of circumstances why you need to sell. And there's other reasons why, God forbid, things like divorce, other kind of life extenuating forces that can take place. So a lot of things happen, not because necessarily a franchisee wants to sell, but they just have to. And that extends to the wider remit of businesses as well, in terms of why and sellers are motivated to reach for the sell button on sites like BFS. So the beautiful thing about franchises are that, notwithstanding the challenges in and around the hurdles that need to be cleared, you are buying a system. It's a ready-made system, sometimes a very well-known system as a franchisee you're buying. So that kind of plug and play ability is a really, I'm I'm finding a positive in the fact that you know what you're going to be buying, because typically as the franchisee you may even use the service, and a lot of the time you have, to the extent you realize as a client, oh my lord, this is for sale, etc. So I think that that desirability factor is really, really key to actually making a franchise resale ultimately a relatively de-risked opportunity for the buyer. It almost sits at the top of the apex of, maximum reward with minimum risk associated with it. And we can see that in terms of inquiry rates on our marketplace at BFS, that, we see a lot of demand going after relatively small supply of franchise resales on BFS. I think there's around 3.5% of our stock in the UK is franchise resales in terms of just raw numbers, but they get a disproportionate bigger number of inquiries on that 3.5%, i.e. they get more than 3.5% worth of inquiries. And I think that reflects something. Also the rise of I think the Mumbo, the multi-unit buyer, multi-brand buyer that is out there, these entrepreneurs that are holdcoing and buying up lots of units, and you can start seeing that. And I know a lot of franchisors would like that as well, because you're dealing with a fewer number of buyers, typically with deeper pockets. So the dynamic is certainly in the last few years has changed, and we've seen that. And we've seen, I'd say around a 20% uptick in terms of the growth of the franchise resale stock. And I think that ultimately reflects the wider kind of appeal of franchising in general. And of course, as more people get into franchises, more people are going to want to exit as well. It's a mathematical kind of corollary of that, and we're only really a mirror of that kind of mathematics. So yeah, it's certainly a kind of growing segment. We have ambitions, for example, to build a specific valuation tool for franchise resales, and we've come across a lot of these kind of factors that impact the valuation methodology, certainly in and around the dynamics of the franchise agreement. And of course, well, how do you quantify that in such a way that you can then create a science out of all those different variables? There, you have to really make it franchise specific in terms of what resales go for different franchises. So we as BFS are investigating that idea, so that prospective franchisees in a given franchise can get at least a ballpark estimate of what a valuation might mean for a given brand and a given franchise opportunity. So yeah, it's a growing and exciting marketplace. It has, as I say, disproportionate positive attention on our marketplace, the franchise resale.
Yeah, I think it's really, I think it's really interesting. I think we're definitely going to get into valuations in a minute. I think before that, I wanted to pick up on something you said, which I think was really interesting, and it's that uptake of franchise resales and that interest in resales, and I can absolutely see why. I mean, when you're looking at buying a business, if you can buy a business that, number one, has a proven model, right? So it sits within a franchise model. It's been proven that that model, generally speaking, is working. And then you've got the individual area or bricks and mortar location. And now you can look at a P&L for 5 years, or you can look at some management accounts, and you can see, you can see a direction that that's going. You can see future opportunities. And I can absolutely see why it's that maximum return and much lower risk. It's, it must be something that people are looking to buy a business, are keen.
100%. And it's no secret. All the things you say is absolutely correct and right. If you're leveraging someone else's product market fit and R&D that has taken possibly years, if not decades, to absolutely get the right positioning, why go through the heartache and hardship of a startup? And
Okay.
so we say that in general about buying an existing business, and you'd expect us to businesses for sale. But with respect to franchises, it's like you take it to another level altogether,
Yeah.
another notch. So, like I say, it sits at the apex of that maximum return and sort of managed and minimized risk. Nothing is, of
Mm.
course, completely risk free, but it's
No.
completely it can be mitigated. And I think you're right with the historical of buying a pre-existing franchise resale.
Mm.
People, traditionally, once it's established itself in the territory, the recurring income is incredibly high, and typically, and that again is a huge factor that kind of offsets some of those earlier complexities we were talking about with the franchise agreement.
Oh, I'm back.
You're back. You
Yes.
disappeared, but I think I stayed online. I
Yeah.
don't know what happened there.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. It can offset that, and I think when you can offset something like that and with something that's going to then appeal to these buyers, and look, I think even as a franchisor, if you're looking at growing your business and you're starting to max out territories with happy franchisors, and actually in the end now you've got a business that is profitable, it's giving a return for the franchisor, for the franchisees, and now all you're doing is doing franchise resells that are really, really popular. You've got plenty of people that want to buy them. You put yourself, that's kind of the aspiration as a franchisor to get to that position as well, where you're
Oh
just
yeah,
doing resales.
yeah.
You're not having to find new franchisees. Let's have a look. We've got a couple of good comments coming up from Joe here. So let's start with this one. He's put, as an in-house CDO, that's a number of well-known QSR and child care bricks and mortar franchise brands. Both the small and large transactions are complex and detail orientated. Franchise agreements and leases all have transfer provisions, and for franchisees, they are often not ready for many of them, and their replacement successor franchisee may not be acceptable to the franchisor and the landlord. Franchisors need to step up and have resale support, resale packet, a program for franchisees to use to package their sales. Yeah, look, I think this is interesting. I mean, obviously, you've got a business there that supports the process of buying and selling a business. Right? So you're kind of offering this service to bolt on for a franchisor to use that to make that a more efficient process. But what do you see in the market in terms of support? Is it there? Could it do with being worked on,
I
or is
think
it something that should be?
I think
Sorry.
it can be worked on. I think Joe's uh, not even alluding to. He's specifically saying this is a complex issue to do with transfer of ownership, and it does require expertise. The problem is I suspect a lot of franchisors are geared to new territory, and they just want to almost set and forget. But the hard, cold reality is um, franchises do sell, and franchisees need to move on. Sometimes, as we said, a lot of the time, not through their own choice. So there does need to be support by the franchisor. The franchisor is by far and away the best placed entity to supply, to give the support. I think good legal advice is really cherished here. So I've had quite a long discussion on this whole topic with Kat Newman at Steinberg Legal, which you might know, Kat, and it is very thorny and it is very complicated, a lot of pitfalls, um, and for a franchisor that can tie them up in terms of resources and focus and attention for what can be perceived to be not too much money, and of course that is all to do with the franchise agreement. They need to train a whole again. They have to make a big investment in that next buyer. There's a big hurdle to clear, and I think the training budget in terms of the remuneration model in transfer may not be 100% right in terms of incentivizing a franchisor to carry out the work that needs to be done. Um, but that, and again, that all goes back to the franchise agreement and how well that's formed and made. But a
Yeah.
good lawyer, a good a good legal advice in this area, who will have seen the war stories and seen all the pitfalls before, can save a lot of time, effort, and energy and heartache.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it's a great comment, Joe, and you always add really good value to the show. And look, I think franchisors, it's no bad thing to hear. Support your franchisees in that process. Work with people like Andrew in Businesses for Sale to make the sale of a franchise business part of it right at the beginning, before you even start talking. Accept the fact that it's not going to be forever, but that's absolutely fine. That's, you just want to make that journey, for however long it's going to be, a successful one. And then you've got a great resale as well. So that's all good stuff as well. Let's have a look. We've got a couple of comments. We've got one from Joe. Let's quickly say hello to the lovely Tim Morris. Tim's put, hi everyone. It's great to be here, basking in the view of the Indian Ocean from the lovely town of Ballito, north of Durban in South Africa. Gosh, some people from all over the world. We've got America, we've got South Africa, and we've got Charles from Hong Kong as well. So, well, I hope you're having a lovely time, Tim. And that sounds beautiful. I'm basking in the view of a Premier Inn car park at the moment. So not quite the same, but there you go. Great to have you with us, though, Tim. Tim is, of course, a fantastic expert here in the UK. Everyone's going to know Tim, part of the Bridge, of course, one of our lovely supporters. There you go. But fantastic to have you with us. And if you can stay with us, always, of course, keen to hear your thoughts, Tim. So let's go back. We had a good one here from Joe. Let's have a look what he's going to say here before we move on, I think, to valuation. Working on multi-unit, multi-brand Mumbos with franchisor clients right now. These get even more complex with company unit sales, and those with franchised locations in particular, getting new development agreements for more growth tied to these transfers. Yeah, I mean, look, I think multi-unit operators, or sales to private equity, these are more commonplace in the US markets because it's a bigger market, and you're often going to find franchisees with tens. Sometimes I spoke to somebody who's got 140 locations recently. And that's more locations than a lot of franchisors have.
Yes, and I hear the value of some of the Mumbo holding companies are actually greater than some of the franchises they're investing in, which is quite something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you're completely right. It does get more complex. I mean, have you dealt with any here in the UK, any sort of multi-site deals?
Well, we've worked with entrepreneurs that are buying up on the demand side. Obviously, as a marketplace, we aren't the franchisor themselves, but we hear anecdotally, and we have worked on, bigger franchise deals. So I know there's a preference by the franchisor to work with a single source of capital that may be buying across multiple units, and that totally makes sense. It simplifies the process, and again de-risks the opportunity for the franchisor to sell lots more simply. So I can understand that, and I can understand the dynamics of what's happening out there, certainly with private equity and capital. What we have seen is that the 7-figure franchise resale is happening, and certainly in the live-in sort of care home space in the UK, that is something we have direct experience of, and that's really exciting to see those kind of buyers in the market buying up. It's not just a single one-man band seeking to replace his job type person, which is perfectly reasonable, and I absolutely applaud the long tail of the economy of that person, because they're taking control and seeking to have some sway on their own destiny, and that's to be applauded, because that's entrepreneurship. But equally as well, that the bigger spender, which sometimes can be investor led or an investment group led as well, where you have effectively like a searcher sort of head of the operation that is the buying operation, which is in cahoots with capital, like the search fund, and that's happening at scale now, increasingly obviously in the States, but I think that is happening as well in the UK as well, which is quite exciting because
Absolutely.
it's changing the whole dynamic of how franchises are being bought and sold, and certainly resales too.
Mm. You mentioned there, and I think this is a good segue to get into valuations now, actually. But you mentioned a seven-figure franchise resale there. Let's touch on valuations. So, we're talking now from a franchisee's perspective, and there, I mean, obviously, you've got a great tool that you're working on that's going to help people with that. But beyond obviously speaking to you guys and using a tool like this, how is a franchisee? How
Yeah.
should they be thinking about valuation? How is that, normally set, or does it depend on the business?
Well, valuation for any business, including franchise resales, is predominantly done on a multiple of cash flow. Right now, sometimes that is a discretionary earnings of that cash flow, where you effectively take the free cash flow of a business and then you add back cash flow that you as a seller aren't going to be taking with you, right? Because that releases cash flow. So not least your own salary, or maybe the salary of your husband or wife or your children, etc.,
Sure.
which is very
Yeah.
common in owner managed operated businesses. And I speak as an owner managed myself, of an owner manager of a business that has family members in it. So that is add back territory. I think the complexity with the franchise resale goes back to, well, how is the impact of the reassignment of the franchise agreement going to impact that valuation? Like, is money due back to the franchisor at this stage? And then sometimes it is, sometimes it is. The franchisor needs to wash themselves from the risk of taking on the new person, not least in the training. That's a huge part of a franchisor's costs and risk. So that adds a whole layer. But by and large, what you're looking at is cash flow, add backs, and then there's negative add backs too, which may be income that may be not being carried with you as you become the new owner. And then there is a multiple against that cash flow, which is determined a lot of the time by the sector. So like gym multiples are typically, because of the subscription nature, typically higher, because the recurring revenue is that bit more trusted and a bit more predictable. So that inflates valuations quite nicely. I think financial services equally as well. Insurance is a fantastically stable business to sell because of the annuities in and around the premiums, etc. So yeah, businesses, I guess, again, can be predicated on the contracts that might be in play with long-term contracts of procurers and purchasers of the services. Goodwill is a factor in this. So there's quite a few moving targets to add in. Our valuation tool is predominantly Value Right, focused on going concerns in and around independent owner managed businesses, and we use the seller's discretionary earnings model, which is roughly what I've outlined here. But I think that added layer of complexity with the franchise agreement and the impact that has can be done.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really
I,
interesting there, that sort of goodwill piece,
yeah,
sort of monthly reoccurring revenue. And look, I think also when you're looking at the valuation of a business, it's not having a reliance on the person that was running it before. Franchise businesses are pretty good at that. They're pretty good at it
yeah.
being a reliance on an area and a structure. So I like that. Let's have a quick look at what Mark's put here. I think the most common valuation is not cash flow unless it's mumbo trans. Most are EBITDA multipliers.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think it's really interesting here because
That is a simplified. That is very simplified, and that's true with private equity, where there's a
yeah,
very obvious number. EBITDA is a very calculable balance, sort of cash flow number that you can work out in terms of what your earnings are before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. But adjusted EBITDA, which is roughly what I'm talking about, also has a sway, because there's going to be calculables in there and factors which can be added back. So yes, there's different horses for different courses. Then you also have discounted cash flow, which is a very,
Yeah.
very well established valuation model for income producing assets too. So I think between the three of DCF, multiple of EBITDA, and also seller's discretionary earnings, you pretty much can value pretty much any asset out there.
Absolutely. It's always a really tricky one. And again, we spoke about this at the beginning about, when you watch something like Dragon's Den or the Shark one in America, and people want to know, you need to know your numbers. But then when you look at the difference of all of these things we're talking about today, the cash flow multipliers, EBITDA, net profit, gross profit, turnover, revenue, there's a lot of numbers. And like you say, having a tool like ValueRight, or having somebody who can advise you as to genuinely what is that number that you can start to think about multiplying.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, a business is worth, whether it's a franchise or a standard independent business, whether it's an owner-managed business or it's a more well-established business that may be private equity backed and investment backed. And I agree that the higher value EBITDA multiple is the preferred choice, but certainly at the lower end of the spectrum of owner-managed businesses, SDE is the kingpin. There's no doubt about that. And just pure kind of the maths of who is using what to value business. The idea that you can ultimately work out what the final price will be through any valuation model is probably for the birds, because ultimately a business is worth what a buyer is prepared to pay. So it really is just about framing the discussion in the first instance, because you get different types of buyers for different reasons. So you can get standard valuations in around trading, but equally as well you can get strategic buyers too, who will pay a strategic premium. And there's no way of really measuring that, because that value is then really in the eye of the beholder of the buyer.
I think you're right. I think as a franchisor, you might have typically it's going to be a particular type of business. And hopefully what you can do is get your franchisees starting to think about these things, starting to think about what and how to get to what would typically be the valuation multiplier of choice in their scenario or their situation. We have actually come to the end of the first part of today's show. We've got a couple of other comments, and we'll quickly put them up on the screen, and then we'll switch to this, but we can't spend too much longer on these. But a very difficult situation, whereas a clever and crafty franchisee has off the books unreported revenue, non-compliant expenses that do not meet the tax code standards. Yes, look, and I think that's the way with any business. You've got to make that judgment. You've got to, look at your EPOS systems. You've got to look at, that versus other numbers and check these things. But I think it's always good to exercise a little bit of caution, check these things.
I think Joe's point is really very smart, because he's basically saying, well, you could be shooting yourself a bit in the foot as a seller if you've been, taking money off the table in a way that isn't tax compliant, because then when it comes to sell, how do you then kind of factor that back into the value of the business in an official enough capacity to then reflect that in the purchase price? So it swings and roundabouts. It's like, yes, you might be being clever and crafty in the first instance, but you may be hanging yourself a little later.
Definitely. Absolutely. We've got a comment here from Mark. I'm going to put it up, but we do need to probably finish the first part of today's show in a sec. In my opinion, banks will look more at EBITDA when considering how much to lend. I agree exceptional items like owner's salary investment needed does come into play. I was a banker for nearly 40 years, for those who are not aware.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And look, it's great to have you with us, Mark. Really looking forward to having you on the show. And look, I think we're probably have a show with a little bit of a finance swing when you're on, Mark. So we're going to definitely get into that. So we have come to the end of the first part of today's show. The next part of the show is the part where I should turn my camera off. Is it off? Yes, it is. You can't see me without wearing a hat. And this part of the show is, of course, brought to you by PJ Murphy and Son, bespoke British hatters. And it's my friend Paul Murphy who made this beauty. So if you'd like a hat, please reach out to Paul. Now, this is also the part of the show where we have a little bit of fun. We get to ask Andrew a question. He gets to ask me any question he likes. And this time it's not going to be about franchising. So the question I'm going to ask you, Andrew, have you ever met anyone famous? And is there a story behind that?
I met someone famous in the 1970s when I was a 5-year-old as a result of going on Tiswas in the 70s. At the heyday of Tiswas, where custard pies were being flung left, right, centre.
Amazing.
And a young Lenny Henry. So I met a young Lenny Henry, a young Chris Tarrant, Bob Carroll Jeeves, Spit the Dog, and Sally Phillips, who you had some, some very memorable assets. Let's put it that way. So yeah, it's I can't really top that, because of course when you're that young and when you get to meet your heroes, and it wasn't as big and as chaotic as you can imagine it in the studio, because that was its whole kind of credo, with absolute mayhem, which was part of its charm. So yeah, I that was a very, very strong memory. I was about 5, 6, and there's somewhere in the vaults of Central TV there is going to be video footage of me.
I was going to say, can we watch this episode somewhere?
Well, it is out there, and in fact, my brother Marcus, who I am in business with BFS, was on it, and he went up against Lenny Henry doing the okay. I don't know if you remember that segment. They would do a long okay. Anyway, for your international audience, this will mean absolutely nothing. But for a person of a certain age in Britain, it's a pretty big deal.
I love it. Well, look, we're nearly at the end today. We've gone over a little bit, but I always promise that Andrew's answered all these questions beautifully today, so he does get his chance to get his own back on me and ask me anything you like. So go for it.
Guessing the backdrop isn't some exotic kind of wallpaper, and you're actually in a Premier Inn.
I am.
Right.
Yeah.
So the obvious question is, what the hell are you doing in a Premier Inn?
Well, actually, my wife and I went away for the weekend to a haunted hotel to do some ghost hunting.
No, that's mad.
We did. So we stayed at a place called Noblethorpe Hall. Yes, we spent until about 3 a.m. with about 10 or 15 other people, hunting for and listening for any ghostly goings on.
And did you find anything? Is the obvious question.
Well, it is. Yes, we did.
Wow.
To a degree. We heard knocks. Tables were moving. It was very exciting.
No.
I mean, look, I always keep an open mind to these things, but it was certainly a very interesting experience. And we got to see the lovely city of York. Now I'm on my way back and working my way back down, hence the reason I'm staying in the Purple Palace. So that's it.
Clarifying that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we have now come to the end of today's episode. So I'd like to, first of all, thank everyone who has been with us live today. You are really what makes this show special. And thanks so much for getting involved and putting in all your questions. And I would, of course, like to thank the fantastic Andrew Marcoux of Businesses for Sale. It's an absolute honor to have you back, sir.
Very welcome. Thank you for having me yet again. I look forward to the next time.
Oh, we look forward to it too. So it just leaves me to talk about what's happening next week. So next week we are due to talk about franchise regulation again, but this time it's going to be franchise regulation, the battle. Now, we are going to have a few people on this episode. We are going to have a few people from one side of the argument talking about being for regulation, and we're going to have somebody who is not for regulation. Well, that's what I hope is going to happen. So it's going to be a fun episode. Hopefully I'm going to keep everybody from fighting with each other. But it's a very important subject, of course. So it'll be great to hear people's thoughts on this. So please join us next week, Tuesday, 12th of May, 5:15 GMT, 12:15 EST. And until next time, take very good care and see you next time. Cheers.